Hey, what's going on, guys? It's QT Paintball, and today we're reviewing Planet Eclipse's new LV2. Is this a worthy successor of the 1.6 that we've been waiting for? Let's get into it. Alright, so we have the Planet Eclipse LV2. Thank you to Planet Eclipse and Jack for lending me this marker. I've been able to hold on to it for a few weeks, been able to take it apart, do a breakdown on it, give it a bunch of field time with it, lend it to a bunch of players, get some feedback, some community feedback from new players, veteran players, Planet Eclipse players, across the board. And overall, a lot of the feedback has been very positive. There are a few things that may be a little bit nitpicky or may not be in favor of this marker, but we're going to get into that now. So first off, this review will remain completely unbiased. Jack Wood in particular has also encouraged to stay that way, as they need to know what kind of issues the markers have. They want an honest review, and they need to know and want to know what they can improve to make the platform better. And that's excellent news, right? So my first impressions of the LV2, and it's kind of in two stages. So I was able to meet up, a friend and I went to the Mid-Atlantic NXL event. We were able to meet up with Jack. He was actually there with Ryan from Lurker, which is a pretty big surprise. I didn't even know what Ryan looked like, and then he introduced himself and he's like, oh, he knows the channel. Or was familiar with it, and that was just like a big surprise. Anyways, Jack Wood, great guy. Shortly after introductions, he was like, you want to see the LV2? It's like, absolutely. He hands me this marker. My friend and I are completely tearing at it, trying to take it apart, trying to get a feel for it. And my initial first impressions of the marker, which was completely tankless, it did have the power barrel on it. I have to say, initially, I didn't think the back grip was very nice. The front grip is fantastic. It's a big marker. You can definitely feel it's a little bit weightier than the 1.6, which I'm pointing to at the wall over there. At least my habit, when it comes to being handed a marker without a tank, I have a tendency to grab it like a handgun, which is kind of high up on the nape of the grip. And I have to say, this dimension on the on the 2 is not that comfortable. It's very boxy. The solenoid is obviously run horizontally here, and then you have a revised trigger assembly compared to the 1.6, which obviously allows it to use the CS shoe or the 170R shoe. Now, with the addition of these toolless grips, I think it's made the overall dimensions of this grip a little bit boxier, a little uncomfortable. And also the grip here, the width here, is also a little wide for my taste. Now, I definitely have smaller hands, but I've also talked to a bunch of people that have large hands, and it's noticeable. It's not a deal breaker in my opinion. It's not unusable, more importantly, but it is something you may notice, and which is why I always encourage for all players, if you're going to make a large purchase, especially on a LV2, is to get some field time with it, get some play time on the field, shoot some paint through it, get a good feel for it, and then make your decision before you buy it. That being said, that was my first issue with the marker. Everything else about it feels of great quality. It definitely feels like a Planet Eclipse product, which I think is a very good thing. Now, I'm going to revise what I said now that I've had this marker for a few weeks now. I should also say that I did not get a chance to shoot it at the NXL event. I was just very busy doing other things. So I didn't have the opportunity to shoot it, and I ended up receiving this a couple weeks later. So let's fast forward a week and a half, and I finally get the LV2 in hand, and I get to shoot it for the first time. It shoots phenomenally. That shoots very nice. Huh. As you can see, I have the FL barrel on it. Since I have multiple sets of the FL, not necessarily the new PWR kit, for apples to apples comparison, for the 1.6 will also be running the same barrel. Alright, we're going to compare my 1.6, which was tuned for a softer shot, with the SFRs closed, low LPR, and a higher dwell. Interesting. Let's chrono this real quick too, just to make sure that it's around 290. The 1.6 is already set to around that velocity. .288, 287, 289. That's perfect. So, without surprise, the LV2 feels very similar to the 1.6, but I think the pitch is a little bit lower, ever so slightly, possibly because of the lower operating pressure, but it feels good actually. It's a very nice shot. Definitely can't complain about that. Let's compare them side by side. They're very similar. They're fairly similar. I would be very curious to see what the LV2 shoots like, tuned down to its slowest and puffiest or poofiest setting. But yeah, that is the LV2. I think it is a pretty good looking marker. It's a much nicer marker in person, I think, where you can appreciate some of the detailings of the body, where we have these horizontal projections. So they're not something you really notice when you're looking at the marker in profile, but when you see it at different angles, you can appreciate that milling. Yeah, it's definitely a larger marker and heavier feeling than the 1.6, but it's not really noticeable. I think the comfort, a lot of people disliked the front grip, but I don't think many people are gonna have an issue with it. And my gripes of the rear grip, again, I don't think are really going to be that noticeable when I'm playing with it, since I'm usually holding the weight of the marker with my right hand, or my forward hand, and the back hand is just walking the trigger. So it's not like I'm carrying the weight of the marker like this. But when you initially hold the marker for the first time, you usually grab it like this, and you're like, oh, that feels good or it feels terrible. And this just doesn't feel that amazing like this, but as soon as you put it in a shooting stance, that kind of goes away. Now, if you guys are familiar, I have an LV. I've had many. I love tuning them. I think they're fantastic shooting markers. My 1.6 I tuned specifically for soft shooting because I was anticipating the LV2 shot to be very soft. 1.6 closed SFRs, high dwell, low LPR, LV2 stock tune. My 1.6 just barely edged it out, just barely, which I think really says something. Now, we have the operating pressure from the 1.6 of 135 psi, and we have the LV2 at around 115 psi. Jack alluded to that they increased the volume in the air chamber, which allows them to drop operating pressure. Now, that's only half of the story. What I found was the new LV2 bolt has a far more efficient flow design to it compared to the 1.6. I plugged the 1.6 bolt into the 2, comparing the two back to back, and there was a 10 FPS increase in FPS or velocity with the new bolt design, which is significant. So when you start adding the lower operating pressure with the package of the LV2, a heavier marker, there's such little vibration to it. It just shoots so well. And I think it's a very appropriate evolution to the shot. And I think a lot of people will be satisfied with the way it shoots, kind of expecting that. Now, as always, go shoot it yourself, and I think you'll be very impressed with it. So, how did the LV2 perform? As you would expect, flawlessly. It just shot. It turned on, didn't leak, no first shot drop off. It just shot. Perfect. I lent it out to people. They said it was fine. They didn't have any issues with it. People loved it. One of the times I almost forgot to get the gun back because he had it the whole day, and he just had nothing but good things to say about it. Now, I lent the marker, or I let a whole bunch of people kind of hold it in the pits, and there was a common theme, and that was the ergonomics of the back grip. So again, it's always worth mentioning, but go try it yourself. I did notice that my hand was fatigued after a long day of play. Now, I have markers like the Field of Force that are heavier than the LV2. My hand doesn't get fatigued with those markers, and I think it has to do with the grip geometry. It's just a more comfortable grip. Your hand's able to make a better purchase in a less strained position. So, again, go try it out yourself. The new screen design. Planet Eclipse did not want to move to the screen that they moved to. They did change to a whole module design within the electronics or with their boards, which they're going to implement to all their future markers, which makes a lot of sense. Though I do feel like there's a lot of real estate used up by these boards, which is kind of strange. Now, I'm no expert in board design or anything. Like, I know nothing about it, but there just seems to be an odd amount of real estate within that grip devoted to electronics. Now, the screen, they're using something very similar, or maybe the same thing, that is found in the G-Tech or the 170R. They obviously moved from what was in the CS1, the G04, or what they've been using for like decades at this point, or more than a decade. Readability in direct sunlight is almost non-existent. It's very difficult to read. Do I think that's an issue? I mean, it could be. But you still have a LED light, which flashes, blinks, color, and all that stuff. If you guys are familiar with the color codes, You'll know if there's paint in the chamber, eye faults, and all that stuff. So, is it an issue? Sort of. Is it really an issue? No, not really. But again, worth mentioning. So I took it a bit further and then modified the 1.6 bolt. I took the webbing off of it, hoping to increase the flow of it, but unfortunately it only got me about 2 to 3 FPS increase. Now, if you guys are familiar with Stanchi developed a bolt for the LV platform that uses the CS2 bolt, soft tips. Now, something to note is that the fitment of that bolt in either the 1.6 or the 2 isn't that great compared to stock. It's noticeably loose inside the breech. Perhaps with better fitment, you may be able to get better sealing. But comparing the stock Stanchi bolt with the LV2 bolt, there's about a 15 FPS difference between the two. Now, I tried plugging the LV2 tip into the Stanchi bolt and only got about a 3 to maybe 4 FPS increase. So again, maybe sort of addressing the fitment issues with the Stanchi bolt, maybe it'll bump those numbers up, but the LV2 bolt seems to be far superior. So let's talk about tunability with LV2. Now, compared to its predecessors, it's pretty much the same for the most part. High efficiency, you want to throw in the light rammer, open the SFRs, lower dwell, raise the LPR. Pretty standard. Pretty easy to achieve a nice, efficient tune. Now, on the softer end is where it kind of differentiates itself a little bit when comparing it to, let's say, the 1.6. Soft tune, compared to the efficiency, it's kind of the opposite, right? You close the SFRs, leave the heavy rammer in, lower the LPR, and raise the dwell. Now, in my opinion, I found that my 1.6 was a little bit happier being tuned to that softer setting. So let's say you have the 1.6, you have the efficient shot here, and you have the spectrum of the soft shot here. The 1.6 stock kind of sits nicely in the middle. Now, when you compare the LV2 with the 1.6, I would say the stock setting is a little bit closer to the soft side. And in my opinion, that kind of lowers the floor or ceiling, depending on how you want to look at it, of how far you're able to tune the soft shot. And really where I found that it seemed the most restrictive is with the LPR tuning. Now, stock, the LPR is 2 rotations out from all the way in, and that achieved me about 81 to 82 PSI. If you rotate that all the way in, that lowers your pressure. 2 rotations in only netted me 78 to 79 PSI for the LPR. Now, generally speaking, the LV platform has always been kind of on the more limited side when it comes to LPR tuning. It just seemed more so than compared to the 1.6. Now, granted, it does seem to be running lower than, let's say, my 1.6. But the LV2 just didn't seem too happy being that low. And obviously you need to raise the HPR and inevitably the LPR to kind of get it to cycle. Because when you start closing the SFRs on the 2, I saw a hit of about 25 to 30 FPS in velocity, which is pretty significant. So yes, you have to raise the pressures probably beyond the stock 82 PSI from what I saw. To get it functioning with those SFRs as restrictive as they were. Now, from my experience, I found that no matter how I kind of adjusted it, it never was really happy, and nor did it ever feel softer than it did stock. Now, maybe I'm sure there are some other configurations I could go for, but I was obviously looking for the more extreme side of it. But that being said, I highly recommend just leaving it stock as it is out of the box. It is such a soft shooting marker. Again, it is very similar to my 1.6 that is tuned for a softer shot. Stock versus tuned, right? Yeah, just go out and enjoy the marker as it is. So this next part is kind of just me having fun and spitballing. So how would I have built the LV2 in my very, very vast experience of designing paintball markers? Obviously, I don't have any. And I'm sure Jack would agree with my random thoughts that I was kind of throwing at him. Now, what they did with the HPR and LPR and the front grip is really clever. It's very nicely packaged. It keeps everything easy to access. It's toolless. I mean, it's a pretty great system. What I would have done is I would have placed both of those regulators into the rear grip. Now, you maintain the HPR that you have in the current CS and Geos, and then the HPR will directly feed into the LPR. And I think that works out really nicely, as the LPR can go straight to the solenoid. The HPR air, or regulated air, can go through the trigger guard as it did, or as it does now, and go straight into the air chamber. So what does that do with the rear grip? What do you do with all the electronics? So what I would have done is taken the board, the screen, the button interface, the battery, and thrown that all into the front grip. Now, that sounds crazy, but there's plenty of other markers that do this. I mean, the Axe is a great example. The foregrip, I feel like, in my opinion, does not require a lot of articulation in its design. People, for the most part, actually like sort of a bulky foregrip design. So it's just comfortable. It's usually just a support part of the marker. Now, the rear grip is where you need the articulation and that comfort for ergonomics. Now, when you remove the board, you're able to rotate the solenoid vertically, which will then decrease the overall width of that grip and would make it far more comfortable. And if you create this new module in the front foregrip of just electronics, you could actually create a common foregrip across the whole line of all the markers, which is what they had the intent of doing by modularizing the boards. Now, just imagine using the same foregrip across the Geos, the CS1s, the G-Techs, and the LV platform. I don't know. I think that's a pretty good idea. You can isolate it. It's far easier to prevent ingress of water and paint and moisture. You can kind of create a contained unit in that foregrip. So I thought that was a pretty nice solution to it. Again, the air routing is a lot more simpler. Now, people are going to be like, oh, how are you going to fit a LPR within the foregrip or in the rear grip? I mean, you have markers like the old Smart Parts Impulse. You have MacDev with their very small HPR, which is located in the rear grip, where they also house their battery and their board, trigger assembly, and I mean, sort of their solenoid, but that's really a solenoid that's orientated between the frame and body. But I'm just saying that the HPR for the MacDev markers is very small, and they have no issues with consistency and stuff like that. So that's my ideal LV2 and the pie in the sky sort of take on it. I'll be curious what you guys think of that idea, so leave some comments down below. So in conclusion, is the LV2 the worthy successor we've been waiting for? And I think the answer is actually a little bit complicated. At face value, they made a updated platform for the LV, they got rid of the AT pipe, and they made it a softer shooting marker. Obviously, there are some trade-offs with that. The long answer is, it's a little complicated because the amount of time in between the iterations, they have you kind of expecting or wanting a bigger or larger evolution of the project or of the platform. But what you guys need to understand is that the 1.6 with PE, they were prepared for the LV series to die at that point. If sales weren't good for the 1.6, that was it. It was only until after they saw the demand for the 1.6 that they started designing for the LV2. Now, I'm sure they had some previous designs that they kind of worked with, but they didn't get serious with it until after the 1.6. So when you consider the amount of time that they had kind of working with this challenging platform, because there's a lot going on when you consider that it's a dual regulated setup with the lever valve, kind of changing the offset of the rammer to the valve, the new change to the board. Now there are obviously other dual regulated poppets that kind of successfully have made macro-less platforms, but they all have certain disadvantages to them in their packaging, or maybe there's different constraints or increased height in some areas and stuff like that. So with the LV2, it's not a perfect marker, right? As I've gone over it through the video, but it's a very competent marker. It's a fantastic shooting marker. I think a lot of people will be really happy with it. Is it worth the $1,600 price tag right now? That's not for me to decide. It is very pricey. As I've said in the video, please get it in hand, try it out yourself, and then make that decision. Thanks for watching this video, guys. I know it got a little long there, but I appreciate the support. Take care, and thank you again, Planet Eclipse and Jack, for giving me the opportunity to review the LV2 for you guys.